Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look at mistakes were made, but not by me.
By Carol Tavris and Elliot Aronson.
That's right. Now, this book, it really gets into,
It's all about self-justification.
self-justification. Yeah, I mean, how we as humans justify our actions.
Right.
Even when we know we're probably wrong.
Yeah.
Like, deep down inside, we're like, uh-oh, I think I messed up here.
Exactly. And yet we find a way to...
We find a way to justify it,
okay.
to make it okay. That's right.
Right.
And
It's a fascinating look at self-deception.
yeah, it really is. And it's not necessarily like about being dishonest.
No, not at all.
Right. It's more about like,
I think it's really those subconscious
like those mental gymnastics.
gymnastics that we all do.
We all do to protect our egos.
To protect our egos, exactly.
Right.
And the book explores this through a concept called cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance. I like that. It sounds very like clinical,
It can be.
It
can be. Imagine you're holding two conflicting beliefs at the same time.
Yeah.
Or you're acting in a way that contradicts your values. That clash creates mental discomfort, and that's what cognitive dissonance is.
Okay.
And so our brains naturally try to reduce that discomfort.
Okay, so is that where the self-justification comes in?
Yeah, so instead of facing that discomfort of being wrong, we kind of twist things around in our minds.
We make ourselves feel better.
Exactly.
Okay. So to illustrate this a little bit better,
Right.
the book actually uses a really interesting example, the story of Marion Keech and her followers back in the 1950s.
Yeah. The doomsday prophecy.
Oh, yeah. Now, I remember this one.
Right.
They were so convinced
Yeah.
that the world was ending. What happened when it didn't?
Well, so instead of admitting they were wrong, they doubled down on their belief,
Okay.
claiming that their faith actually saved the world.
Okay, so their commitment was so strong that they couldn't just admit they were wrong.
Exactly. They had to find a way to justify it.
They had to find a way to justify it, even when the evidence was like right in front of them.
Even when all the evidence contradicted their prediction.
Yeah. I mean, so what is going on psychologically then when people are faced with, clear evidence to the contrary,
Yeah.
but they cling even tighter to their beliefs?
Well, that's a great question, and the book delves into several mechanisms at play. One is something called belief perseverance. It's our tendency to cling to our existing beliefs even when they're discredited.
So it's almost like admitting we were wrong is more unsettling than just sticking with a belief even though we know it's false.
Yeah, in a way, yes. And this ties into another mechanism called confirmation bias,
Okay.
where we tend to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs
Right.
and dismiss or downplay evidence that contradicts them.
Okay.
And so we unconsciously filter information
To fit our existing narrative.
to fit those pre-existing narratives.
Right.
And these mechanisms, combined with our desire to maintain a positive self-image, are really powerful drivers of self-justification.
Okay. So it's not just limited to, extraordinary situations like doomsday prophecies. It's something that
No, not at all.
happens all the time.
Happens in our everyday lives
Yeah.
all the time.
I know. I've definitely been in situations where I put so much effort into something, like a project,
Oh, yeah.
even when it's like clearly not going well.
Yeah.
And I just find myself valuing it
Yes.
more just because I put so much time and energy.
Right.
It's like I need to make it worth it somehow.
That's a classic example of what we call the sunk cost fallacy.
The sunk cost fallacy. I like that.
We irrationally cling to things not because they're valuable, but because we've already put so much into them.
Right.
It's like we need to justify that investment,
Exactly.
even if it means continuing down a path that's not serving us.
Yeah.
Right.
I've definitely fallen into that trap, I'll admit.
Oh, absolutely.
The more I invest in something, the harder it is to admit that maybe it's a mistake. And I keep telling myself, like, no, I'm on the right track,
Yeah.
even when the evidence is suggesting otherwise.
And the book highlights how this isn't just about our own personal choices, right? It plays out in relationships, organizations, even on a societal level.
Mhm.
It can have serious consequences.
Does that make sense? So we've established cognitive dissonance.
Right.
Is this like engine driving self-justification?
Yes.
So how does this actually manifest in our lives? Like, I'm guessing memory plays a pretty big role.
Memory is not a perfect recording of the past. It's more like a story that we constantly reshape to fit our current beliefs and self-image.
That's a little scary.
It can be. We unconsciously edit our memories.
So you mean like two people can experience the same event and have completely different memories?
Absolutely. And neither of them is lying.
Okay.
They've just filtered the experience through their own self-justifying lens. And the book gives examples of couples, recalling arguments, and their versions are so different.
So it makes you wonder, like, what is truth?
Yeah. What can we actually rely on
If our own memories are...
if our memories are constantly being rewritten?
Yeah. I mean, what are the implications of that?
It raises questions about the validity of eyewitness testimony,
Oh, yeah.
which we often see as the gold standard, right?
Right.
The book points out that those accounts can be unreliable.
So someone can be genuinely trying to tell what happened,
Right.
but their memory might have skewed the story.
Their memory has reshaped the story.
Okay.
And this is why understanding self-justification is so crucial. It helps us to question our assumptions,
Right.
recognize our biases, and approach information with a healthy dose of skepticism.
So it's like we need to become more critical of our own experiences
Exactly.
and our memories,
Right.
recognizing that they're not always objective.
Exactly.
Okay. That's a tough one, but...
It is, but this is particularly important when it comes to relationships.
Relationships. Okay, so let's get into that. How does this all play out in our relationships with others?
Sure.
I mean, I can see how this can lead to a lot of misunderstandings and conflicts, right?
It does.
Because we're all coming from our own perspective,
Right.
which might not be the reality of the situation.
You're right. Remember those implicit theories that we develop about our partners?
Yeah.
Well, those theories can become quite distorted
Okay.
when self-justification kicks in. Instead of seeing our partners for who they truly are,
Yeah.
we see them through the lens of our own justifications.
So it's like our own baggage, our own insecurities.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
clouding our judgment
Right.
of our partners.
And it prevents us from truly understanding them.
Okay.
And so we create these narratives
Right.
about why they behave the way they do.
And those narratives are more about us than them.
Often, yes.
Okay.
It's more about protecting our own ego than truly understanding our partner.
Got it. So the book actually illustrates this with a case study of a couple, Deborah and Frank.
Right.
And they're locked in this constant cycle of conflict, each one convinced that they are the one who's right.
Right.
So what was causing that disconnect?
It's more nuanced than just incompatibility.
Okay.
Deborah saw Frank as inconsiderate and unsupportive, while Frank saw Deborah as demanding and critical.
Got it.
And so both were justifying their own actions.
And blaming the other.
And blaming the other, exactly. And their memories of events were totally skewed.
To support their individual narrative.
Exactly. So they were each living in their own self-justifying reality.
Wow. That's heavy.
It is.
So how do we break out of that? How do we get out of that cycle?
It's not easy. The key is empathy.
Okay.
It's about making a conscious effort to understand our partner's experience,
Even if we don't agree?
even if we don't agree with it. Exactly. And it's about being willing to question our own narratives,
Right?
to see if we are contributing to the problem.
Yeah, because we probably are at least a little bit.
We all are.
Right. But that's a hard one, right? Empathy is a tough one.
It is, especially in the heat of the moment, when emotions are running high.
Any practical tips on how to cultivate empathy in those situations?
One technique that can be helpful is active listening.
Okay.
Really focus on what your partner is saying
Right.
without interrupting.
Without interrupting. Oh, that's a hard one.
It is. But
Yeah.
yeah, okay. Try to reflect back their feelings.
Okay.
Ask clarifying questions.
Got it. So it's really about shifting the focus away from ourselves and trying to defend ourselves
Exactly.
to really trying to understand where they're coming from.
It's about recognizing that our partners are complex individuals.
Yeah.
Just like us.
Right.
They have their own stories, their own justifications.
Right.
And sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to try to see the world through their eyes.
That's a good one. I like that. So it's less about being right
Yeah,
and more about understanding.
absolutely.
This has been really eye-opening. I
Yeah.
feel like you've given us like a whole new way to view our relationships,
Well, I hope so.
you know? But this whole idea of self-justification, it doesn't just impact our personal lives, right?
It does.
So where do we go from here?
Well, next time, we'll explore how self-justification plays out in systems and institutions. We'll look at its role in wrongful convictions,
Wow.
political polarization, and other areas where the stakes are really high.
Okay. Get ready for some more thought-provoking stuff.
That's right.
All right, so welcome back to the deep dive. We're continuing our exploration of mistakes were made, but not by me.
Yes.
And, you know, how this need to protect our egos, like we were talking about last time,
Right.
it can actually have, you know, a ripple effect far beyond our personal lives.
It does.
Last time we talked about, like, cognitive dissonance and how that plays into it all.
Yeah, that mental discomfort when our actions and beliefs clash.
Right. And it's like this alarm bell going off in our head, telling us to find a way to justify ourselves.
Right. Make it okay somehow.
Even if it means, like, twisting the reality a little bit.
Exactly. And as we get deeper into this book, it becomes clear that this isn't just about like individual quirks
Yeah.
or even relationship dynamics. This is like systems and institutions
Okay, so like on a much larger scale.
on a much larger scale.
In what ways does this kind of play out?
One of the most sobering examples the book explores is wrongful convictions
Oh, wow.
within the justice system.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking about someone being wrongly convicted, that's
It's chilling, yeah.
sends shivers down my spine.
Yeah.
What are some of the factors that contribute to that?
The book delves into this concept of tunnel vision,
Okay.
where investigators become so fixated on a suspect, a particular suspect or a theory,
Okay.
that they just overlook
Anything else?
or downplay evidence that might point in a different direction.
So they've already kind of decided in their mind what the narrative is. And
Right.
they're looking for...
They're just grabbing information to support it.
Exactly, even if it means ignoring other things.
Exactly. And once they've invested all that time and energy into building the case, that sunk cost fallacy kicks in.
Right, like we were talking about.
So admitting they might be wrong becomes even harder.
Oh, especially when it's like their reputation on the line.
Their careers are on the line, yeah.
Right.
The pressure to solve cases, to maintain a conviction rate,
So all of that kind of creates an environment where self-justification just thrives.
it becomes deeply entrenched in the system.
Wow.
Yeah. And the book also examines cognitive biases.
Right.
Like confirmation bias can lead investigators to seek out evidence that just supports their initial hunch
Right.
and dismiss information that contradicts it.
So it's like our brains are naturally looking for patterns.
Yeah, we want to create a story.
Right, to make sense of things.
And sometimes those stories blind us to alternative explanations.
Exactly. So this isn't just about individual investigators, though, right?
Yeah.
It's like the entire system
The full system.
can be influenced.
Prosecutors, judges, juries.
Wow. So self-justification is kind of like this, I don't know, like a virus almost.
It's pervasive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the book has some heartbreaking consequences. It talks about cases where innocent people were imprisoned
For years.
for years, decades sometimes.
Because of like a cascade of events.
Self-justifying actions by people in authority.
I mean, you mentioned the case of Thomas Lee Goldstein.
Yeah. He spent 24 years in prison
Just for a crime he didn't commit.
for a murder he didn't commit.
It's just unimaginable.
It really is.
So in his case, what actually led to that?
There was flawed eyewitness testimony.
Okay.
There was other evidence that pointed away from him.
Okay.
But the investigators, they were so convinced of his guilt
They were so sure.
that they just didn't pursue those other leads.
Wow.
And the book suggests that tunnel vision confirmation bias played a huge role in that injustice.
It's like with all the best intentions sometimes,
Yeah.
our need to be right.
Egos.
It can just have these huge consequences.
Right.
You know, It makes you wonder.
It makes you question the justice system.
Like, yeah, the whole foundation of it.
Yeah. And it's not an isolated incident. The book also discusses the Central Park jogger case.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
5 teenagers coerced into confessing
Wow.
to a crime they didn't commit. And their confessions, driven by fear and pressure,
Right.
later found to be inconsistent with forensic evidence.
Wow. Yeah, that one was a media sensation.
It was all over the news.
And, it makes you realize how easily we can be swayed
Yeah.
by our own biases.
By our assumptions. Exactly. And it's a reminder that human judgment is
Yeah.
fallible, especially when it's influenced by self-justification.
So, I mean, what can we do? What can we do about this?
The book doesn't have any easy solutions,
Right.
but it does highlight the importance of awareness.
Okay.
Recognizing our own tendencies, questioning our assumptions, being willing to consider other perspectives,
Okay.
those are crucial steps.
So if we're more aware of the potential for bias, we can at least try to be a little bit more objective.
Exactly.
But that's not enough, probably, right?
No, it's not just about individual awareness. The book suggests systemic changes are also needed.
Okay, like what?
Things like mandatory recording of interrogations,
Okay.
better training for law enforcement on cognitive biases,
Right.
emphasis on evidence-based practices.
So real, tangible things
tangible changes, yeah.
that to be implemented.
Yeah, they can help create a more just system.
Okay. But
Yeah.
like, this isn't just about the justice system, right?
It's not. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Politics, business, healthcare, our personal relationships.
Anytime we're challenged, basically.
Anytime our beliefs or actions are challenged, yeah.
So what you're saying is that this need for self-justification,
Yeah.
it's like in our DNA almost.
It's fundamentally human.
Yeah. That's a little scary, but
It is sobering.
it's also, I guess, empowering in a way.
It is.
You know, it helps us to approach these really complex issues
Right.
with a little bit more understanding.
With more compassion and a willingness to talk about it.
Okay. Now, so far we've talked about the downsides, the dark side
Right.
of self-justification.
Yeah.
But is there a flip side?
That's a fascinating question.
You know, can it ever be a force for good?
It can be.
Okay.
That's the next chapter of our exploration. While it can lead us astray,
Yeah.
it can also be a motivator for positive change.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How can something that seems so defensive
I know, right?
actually be a good thing?
We'll talk about it next time.
All right, so welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking about mistakes were made, but not by me.
Yes.
And really unpacking this whole idea of self-justification,
Yeah.
how it kind of shows up in our lives and the world around us. Last time, we got into some heavy stuff.
We did.
Wrongful convictions, systemic biases. It's a lot to think about,
Yeah, a lot to process.
you know. But at the end there, you hinted that there might actually be like a flip side to all of this.
Right.
That self-justification could actually be maybe a force for good. I'm really curious to kind of explore that idea a little bit.
It's a fascinating paradox.
It is, right?
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, it leads us to deny our mistakes.
Right. But that same drive can fuel a desire to improve,
Okay, to get better.
to be better. Yeah.
I mean, how does that work? How do we make that shift?
Well, the book argues that the key is owning up to our mistakes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like taking responsibility
Yeah.
sounds simple, but it's really hard.
It is hard. It's really hard, especially when, we live in a world where mistakes are seen as failures.
Exactly.
And we're supposed to be perfect all the time.
Right.
Like admitting that you were wrong, it can feel so, I don't know, like vulnerable.
It is like you're exposing yourself to
Yes.
judgment, to
Yeah.
rejection. Yeah.
So it's like ingrained in us
It's deep in our social fabric. Yeah.
to just not,
To hide it.
to
Or
hide our flaws.
to pretend we have it all figured
Well,
out.
right. But the reality is everybody makes mistakes,
Right. It's part of being human. The difference is how we respond.
to those mistakes.
So instead of seeing them as something to be ashamed of,
Yeah.
we need to reframe it,
See them as opportunities for learning,
to learn from them
to grow.
and grow. Yeah. I mean, that's a big mindset shift
It is.
for a lot of people.
It is a big one.
Yeah.
And it starts with being willing to say, I was wrong.
Yeah.
Even when it's hard.
Especially when it's hard.
Especially when it's hard. Even when it challenges our beliefs or threatens our sense of who we are.
I mean, that takes a lot of courage,
It does.
to do that, especially when maybe, your career's on the line or
When the stakes are high.
the stakes are high. Exactly.
It does. And the book acknowledges that our brains resist that
Right.
because it triggers cognitive dissonance, right? It creates a conflict between our self-image and our actions.
Right. Because we want to see ourselves as good people
Right.
who do the right thing.
Exactly.
But then we mess up.
But we make mistakes.
So how do we overcome that resistance then? How do we convince ourselves that it's okay to admit that we're not perfect?
One thing that helps is recognizing the benefits of admitting our mistakes.
Okay. There are benefits.
Yeah.
Like what?
It can actually enhance our credibility.
Really?
Yeah. Strengthen our relationships.
How so?
Think about it. When we're honest about our shortcomings, it makes us more relatable. It makes us more human,
Okay. Yeah.
right? People are more likely to trust someone who acknowledges their flaws
That's true.
than someone who pretends to be infallible.
Right.
Right. It
Right.
creates that authenticity.
Yeah. You're keeping it real.
Yeah. And the book gives a great example of this with Oprah Winfrey.
Oprah. Yeah. Okay.
Remember when she endorsed James Frey's memoir?
A Million Little Pieces.
A Million Little Pieces, yes.
Right.
And then it came out that parts of it were fabricated.
Right. Right. Yeah. And so what did she do?
She had a choice.
Yeah.
Double down on her support or admit she made a mistake.
And she owned it.
She did. She apologized, acknowledged her error in judgment.
That must have been hard.
Yeah, it must have been incredibly difficult on such a public stage.
Yeah. But it didn't hurt her, right?
No. Actually, many people praised her
For her honesty.
for her honesty, for her willingness to take responsibility.
So it actually
It strengthened her
it
credibility.
made people trust her more
Exactly.
because she was willing to admit she made a mistake.
Exactly.
Wow. So it shows that it is possible to do it.
It is.
And it doesn't have to be a career-ending thing.
You can turn those mistakes into opportunities.
Yeah. But how do we do that? How do we apply this, in our everyday lives?
Well, the book suggests you start small.
Okay.
Don't try to tackle your biggest regrets right away.
Okay.
Focus on those everyday slip-ups. Right. Forgot to pick something up at the store.
Yeah, little things.
Made a mistake at work. Just those little things.
Okay.
Pay attention to how you feel when you admit you messed up. Notice the resistance that comes up and challenge it gently. Ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen?
Right.
Often the consequences are much less dire than we imagine.
It's almost like we're building a muscle.
You are.
Right. Admitting fault.
You're building that muscle so that when bigger challenges come up, you're ready.
Yeah. So then we're not so afraid to say, hey, I messed up,
Yeah, you're more comfortable with it.
you know?
And as we become more comfortable, we can shift our perspective
Okay.
from a perfection mindset
Yeah.
to a growth mindset.
I like that.
Instead of seeing errors as failures, we see them as valuable feedback,
To learn.
opportunities to improve.
Yeah. So it takes the pressure off a little bit.
It's
You know, to be perfect all the time.
allows us to embrace that messy process of growth.
I like that. Now, you mentioned forgiveness earlier.
Right.
Where does forgiveness fit into all of this?
Well, think about it. Self-justification keeps us stuck in those cycles
Right.
of blame and defensiveness.
Yeah. Towards ourselves and others.
Towards ourselves and others, yeah. Forgiveness offers a way out,
Okay.
a path towards healing.
But it's hard, though.
It is hard.
Right. To forgive.
It is, especially when we've been hurt.
Especially when you've been wronged.
Yeah. And it's not about condoning the behavior.
Right.
It's about releasing that grip
Okay.
that anger and resentment have on us.
So it's more about us than them.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
It's an act of self-care
Okay.
to reclaim our peace of mind.
I like that. So how do we do that? How do we actually practice forgiveness?
Well, it's a process,
Okay.
not a switch you can just turn on and off. It starts with acknowledging the pain.
Okay.
Allow yourself to feel those feelings.
Yeah. The hurt, the anger.
You can't just ignore them.
Right.
You have to face them.
And then what?
Once you've acknowledged that pain,
Yeah.
then you can explore whether you're clinging to it
Okay.
as a way to justify your own actions or beliefs.
Okay.
Sometimes we hold on to anger
Right.
because it makes us feel powerful
Like-
or righteous.
Like we were in the right.
Or like we were in the right. Exactly.
So our anger is almost like a shield,
It is a shield
preventing us from
From
seeing clearly.
from moving forward.
Okay, so forgiveness is about letting go of that.
Letting go of the shield.
The shield, the need to be right,
To blame.
to blame that.
To justify.
And then we can forgive.
Exactly. And remember, forgiveness is a gift you give yourself.
Yeah, I like that.
It's about freeing yourself from that burden.
Yeah, like a weight have been lifted off.
Yeah.
Wow. This has been a really, really insightful conversation.
I'm glad.
You know, it's like we peeled back all these layers of self-justification.
Yeah.
You know, all that fear, the ego, the
Hey.
pain that we try to hide.
All right.
And we also explored how powerful it can be to own up to our mistakes.
Right.
You know, to embrace this idea of like a growth
Your
mindset.
growth mindset. Yeah.
To forgive
I forgive.
both ourselves and others. I mean, if you had to boil it down to one key takeaway, what would you say is the most important thing for our listeners to remember?
We all have the capacity for growth and change.
Okay.
Self-justification is powerful,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to control us.
Okay.
By understanding how it works, we can make more conscious choices.
Right. Choices that.
Choices that are more in line with who we want to be.
Right. And by, embracing those imperfections,
Yes.
learning from our mistakes,
Right.
trying to practice forgiveness.
We can create a better life for ourselves and for others.
Absolutely. This has been a really, really interesting deep dive. Thank you so much for being with us,
It's been my pleasure.
sharing your expertise.
It's been fun.
And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time.